What is customer acquisition cost? Customer acquisition cost is actually a fairly simple formula. Sometimes we call it CAC, CAC. And it's the sales that you have, including salaries, tools, and other expenses, plus the marketing expenses, again, including salaries, tools, and other expenses, divided by the number of new customers. And all of that data needs to be within the same time period. So you might calculate CAC for a year, or you might calculate CAC for a quarter. And that's a pretty straightforward formula. In general, one way to think about should I include an expense in CAC is if John were to disappear in the sales department, what expenses would disappear with him? Don't go and fire John, but that's one way to think about the expenses to include. The number is important because it represents the efficiency of your marketing and sales process. And this is something that investors look very closely at, but also analysts as they try to understand how well a company is performing or has the potential to perform. So if you consider a company that has, let's say, $125,000 of marketing and sales expense a month, and they pay commissions, they pay salaries, they pay ad spend. Let's say that it's a technical company and they do free trials, and the free trials have support. All of that goes into the expense pile under that 125K. And in the course of the month, they bring in 50 new customers. Great. Their CAC, after you calculate, would be 125 over 50. And in this case, I've made 125 include both sales and marketing, or 2,500. So it would be $2,500 customer acquisition cost. Where that number becomes really interesting is if you trend it over time and watch how it performs. It's expected that your CAC cost might be high in the beginning, but lower as you find your fit with the market and start to get a sense for where your good customers are. How much should you spend in customer acquisition cost? Well, it's not uncommon for smaller companies that are just getting going to spend as much as 20-30% on marketing and sales costs. As you go higher beyond that number, it starts to become a question of how much do you have to spend to get good customers in the door who don't stay? And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But in general, let's just say that you were spending 20%. Well, that's a very big percentage, and it really varies a lot by industry. Now, I don't have the percentages across industries, but I have the actual end calculation. So an industry like travel might be something like $7 to acquire a customer. But at the complete opposite end, an industry like SaaS, technology companies, would be much higher at around $395 to acquire a new customer. Along the way, you have different companies from different industries in between, and that could be manufacturers coming in around $83, or banking and insurance coming in around $303. But overall, your customer acquisition costs will vary, and your percentage that you dedicate to customer acquisition should be directly related to how efficient your processes are running. So, what is the CAC to CLV ratio? Well, in our example before, we calculated CAC from a company that had $125,000 in sales and marketing expense, and that included all kinds of stuff like commissions, sales support, free trial. And 50 new customers came in, giving them a CAC of about 2,500. Well, the proper ratio between a CAC and CLV, meaning how much you get out of a customer over their lifetime, is about 3x. That's what investors and a healthy company generally should be operating at. So in this example, if it takes you $2,500 to acquire a customer, which is quite high, then you should be getting $7,500 back from them over their customer lifetime value. And remember, we talked about CLV and how to calculate that in the first part of our series. So these numbers become much more interesting when you trend them. If you watch CAC over time, is it rising or falling in relation to CLV? If CAC is going up and CLV is going down, well, then you've got a major red flag, because that means that you're paying more to get customers who don't stick around. On the other hand, if CAC is falling and CLV is rising, well, that's a very positive sign that you've got a sticky business and customers continue to stay with you. Now, I run a blog called Schrodinger's Cat, and this is a perfect example of Schrodinger's Cat, where if you're not looking at the right metrics, you don't know if your business is going to be alive or dead. Look at CAC to CLV ratio and use that to help calculate, to help get ahead of how your business is performing. What are customer acquisition channels? Well, when we look at CAC alone, it gives us one number, but to make it more useful, we need to understand where that customer came from. In the digital world, we oftentimes look at it through channels, although to be fair, everything can be tracked and measured on the digital world. So even if you're running a billboard, you might have a small code that allows you to track where that traffic came from. QR codes can also work to that effect. There can be many ways to track the offline world in the digital space. But that aside, channels are how we measure all the traffic coming in, or how we record what bucket it came from. And an example of different channels, I'm using the Google example here, could be direct. In other words, somebody typed in my URL and they came directly to my site, or they clicked on a bit.ly link that didn't have a campaign code in it and they came directly to my site. Organic search is a different way that people come to my site. That means I use the Google search engine and I didn't click on an ad, but I clicked on an organic link. You can also have paid search to complement organic search. You can have social or affiliates or any number of different channels. These are the ones that are out of the box with the Google system. Now, note that there are two more things that you'll sometimes see in this channel structure. One is the value none, and this always throws people off because it basically means whatever tracking system you're using, it has no value it can pick up and attribute to a channel. The other one has to do with direct and the confusion that sometimes comes from whether it's direct or none or referral. All of these things have very slight differences, which you can see in the definitions up above. Now, Google uses a more elaborate system underneath channels called source medium, and I'm going to talk about that just briefly because I want to give you a little bit of a hint about campaign codes and how they can be very powerful for doing really good CAC to CLV analysis. What are campaign codes? Well, campaign codes are a great way to boost the value of your customer data and help you understand a little bit more about how they were acquired and under what circumstances they were acquired. We just talked about channel. And in addition to channel, there are, in the Google system, there is source and medium. Basically, think about source as large chunks of traffic coming through, very similar to channel. And think about medium as an identifier that goes alongside of that. So if one element of the source is paid search, then you might have PPC be the medium, or you might have affiliate be the medium. It's fairly complicated on how to put source and medium together, so I won't go into it here, but just know that you can set all these different values. What I do want you to take away is that the campaign name is one of the most powerful and underused features in the entire system. And the example I'm showing here is how structured campaign names can be used to give you a lot more insight about how somebody came in and why you wanted them to come in or how you were trying to get them through. In this case, campaigns are named as acquisition or retention or awareness. Now you can name these things anything you want, but note that it's using a dash as a divider. That's important because some dividers are actually read into the campaign code structure. So you want to use one that's not going to be read. It's not going to break up your data. So in this case, we used a dash. And then we coupled additional information into it, such as the location, the geolocation, and then the product. Now, again, you can make this anything you want, but what it allows you to do is to get a sense of how your customer journey is shaping up. Are you actually bringing new customers through a retention effort, or are you getting new customers through the right kind of acquisition effort? What kind of product was that acquisition effort focused on? Because just the fact that an acquisition effort goes to a specific landing page does not make it appear in the data streams, unfortunately. So that's one of the little insider secrets. Get more value out of your campaign codes. What is a good customer acquisition strategy? So how do you know your customer acquisition strategy is working? One way to do that is to look at the CAC to CLV ratio. Let's say, for example, in this graphic, that the person running email spent $250,000 on email over the course of a year. So their acquisition or their fully loaded customer acquisition cost might have been $250,000, all associated with email. For that $250,000, they received $947 of customer lifetime value. That ratio is 3.7, which is great. Remember, we said that we wanted the customer acquisition cost to be about 3x. And what that tells you is that email is performing. It is giving you back what you spend in it, and it is giving you good quality customers. Now, because there are 4,131 customers, so 4,131 customers, you can back into the numbers and realize that, hey, I could afford to spend about $60 per customer in email. You can break that down further by the quality of customer, high value customers, medium value, low value, and then skew the number higher or lower depending on what kind of customer you were targeting. Now let's look at a second example related to paid search. Now, this is another channel where the person spent $250,000 in CAC, let's just say. And in return, they got $321,000 of customer lifetime value. Now our ratio here is 1.2, which is not great. Because there are 1,498 customers, I can see that there's an inefficient spend of about $214 per customer in this channel. Now, I either want my CLV to go up or my cost to go down to get in the zone for the right ratio. Now, I might shoot to improve this gradually, maybe by shooting for a 2x return and cutting back gently to 150K of spend so that I can see if I'm getting performance up. But I want to make a special caveat about paid search because it's often an assist channel. And what you don't want to do is say, I'm going to keep cutting that spend back. You have to have a certain amount of spend to just get in the game and see the right metrics come through. So that's why I'm not suggesting that you cut it all the way back to what gives you a potential 3x return. What you might invoke there is like a death spiral where you keep cutting and cutting and you can never get enough velocity because you haven't put enough juice into the system. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But otherwise, you can do the same thing and you can take your different ad campaigns and goose them up or down according to the quality of customer that you're getting back, which is reflected in the customer lifetime value. So that's just a great way to use Cactus ELV to understand performance without digging into the depths of attribution analysis. All of this is using whatever attribution that you commonly subscribe to. So how do I reduce customer acquisition costs? Well, if we look at our example for CPC, we can see that the ratio between 321,000 in customer lifetime value to an assumed spend of 250,000 gives us a ratio of 1.2, which is not great. Remember, we want a ratio of about 3x between CAC and CLV. Well, what can I do to reduce that spend? I could move the number down until I got a 3x ratio. In other words, I could keep dropping my spend until it was potentially in line with that customer lifetime value. But that is not what I recommend. What I recommend instead is to move down gently. It's clear that there's not enough efficiency here. However, we want to be careful to keep enough momentum, enough juice in the game so that the channel is performing, particularly with paid search, because this is often an assist channel. So if I'm a new customer, I might look at a paid search ad first, but eventually convert on email or eventually convert on social or something else. All of that creates a rat's nest of attribution modeling, which I won't go into here. But suffice it to say that whatever method you use, you don't want to cut back your spend harshly. You want to be gentle and understand, I want to goose the number and gradually get to higher and higher customer lifetime value. Now, what if the customer lifetime value won't budge? Well, here's another way to look at it. We've been thinking about customer lifetime value by channel and thinking, oh, how do I adjust my spend here and adjust my spend there? Well, you actually need to look at it at two levels. One is the overall CAC to CLV, and the second is the channel-based CAC to CLV. So take it with a grain of salt when your channels are above or below your ideal mark, and then make a judgment about how well you think they're performing and whether they can be improved. What is a good example of customer acquisition cost reduction? Well, in my podcast, the Customer Equity Accelerator, I have a fantastic interview with the Chief Analytics Officer of Electronic Arts, Zach Anderson. And here is the interview where he talks about how he used CAC to CLV to understand their performance and what he did about it.
That's a perfect example of what we still see companies doing is what we always call it spray and pray. If I run enough volume, or I sometimes call it quantity marketing instead of quality marketing, it's really tough for marketers to make that shift. And I can appreciate the cultural change you must have been working against, because to suddenly say we're not going to market to this huge volume had to cause a lot of consternation internally for people who are like, oh, is that going to work if you pull back?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, we did it piecemeal over a few years, backing off and changing. But I mean, it also meant, I think at our height of spending on marketing, we're spending 22% of revenue on marketing, which is a huge number. And, that year, talking about volume marketing, we bought a Super Bowl ad, an NFC playoff ad, an NBA Finals ad, a World Series ad.
Wow.
Like every major sporting event, we had an ad for something, and a host of other high prominence ads. And then we were also spending on billboards and on print advertising, all these things that had like huge audiences, but really low targetability, really low ability to discriminate between customers that are really going to want to play this game versus aren't. And so that just generated that. We were a huge marketing machine, but the problem was we were just way overspending. At the time, frankly, we were overspending to make games that weren't so great. And marketing was getting expensive, primarily because I think we weren't investing as much of it into the games, which is a pretty bad cycle for a company. You've lost touch with your customers. You're overspending on marketing to try to move your product. And our financials were going down. Our stock price hit an all-time low of like $11. And we were in really dire straits. And what's really interesting to me is that all kind of happened right a couple years or maybe even a year and a half into the time where I had finally got my hands on this data, switched jobs, and I was like, oh, I see what's going on. This is really clear to me. So I had this like weird insight at just the right time for the company to really start to dig in and do it. And so it's quite a harrowing and interesting time. So we shifted all of those people in marketing around and how we bought and exited our agency, built a bunch of new systems, and started bringing down marketing costs pretty dramatically. I think we cut it like 6 or 7 points in the first year.
Wow.
And eventually got it down below 12%, which is hundreds of millions of dollars being both dropped to the bottom line and able to be invested back in the product, which is where we should be investing our money.
Exactly.